Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Allison from Redmond Mag, and I'd like to thank y'all for joining us today. I am thrilled to welcome you to today's event titled Masterclass, Managing Email Signatures on Microsoft Environment, sponsored by Exclaimer. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping details. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please make sure to type those in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. Exclaimer has provided some resources which correspond with today's event, so please take a moment to check those out. They are located to the right of your audience console. Today's webcast is also being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link in your email to rewatch the presentation or to share with a colleague. And now I'm so thrilled to announce our speakers for today. We have the pleasure of hearing from Paul Bardsley, Head of IT Infrastructure at Exclaimer, and Brian Posey, freelance technology author and 22-time Microsoft MVP. We will also have Tom Yates, Principal Solution Engineer at Exclaimer, on during the Q&A at the end of the event to help answer some questions. So, we are in for a great event. And with that, I'll pass time over to Brian to get us started.
Hello, greetings, and welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking all about managing email signatures. Now, I'll be the first to admit that email signature management probably isn't going to be top of mind for most IT pros. I mean, let's face it, we're all busy. We have a million things coming at us every day. So email signature probably isn't one of the things that we really spend a lot of time thinking about. Most of us are probably okay going along with the status quo. And the status quo can mean different things for different organizations. And I'll share some examples of that later on as we go along. But for our purposes here, it just means doing what you've always done. But at best, the status quo is inefficient. At worst, the status quo can be problematic, both for the organization and for the IT department, who may end up being tasked with having to manage message signatures. So with that said, before I get too far into this, I believe that we have a survey that needs to be done. Paul, did you want to take care of that?
Yeah, we got a survey for what you do now for your email signature management. It'd be nice to know where we are and what people are using. So we've got that now for you. We'll read the results at the end.
Okay to move on?
Yep.
So let's get started by talking about some ways that clinging to the old ways of doing things could potentially be hurting the organization. The first one is inconsistency, because if signature management is left to the individual user, then what you're going to end up with is everybody's signature is going to look a little bit different. And so if you're trying to paint a cohesive picture of your organization and project a consistent image for your organization, then having everybody's signatures look different probably isn't going to meet your needs. So inconsistency is certainly one problem that can result. Another potential problem is that the information contained within email signatures can easily become outdated. Keep in mind that every time an employee in your organization gets promoted or they move to a different department or anything like that, chances are their message signature needs to be updated. And at best, if you've got somebody manually updating those signatures, there's going to be a lag from the time that that promotion is made or that employee moves to a new department to the time that their new signature takes effect. But if this is a manual process, then there's a burden that's also placed on whoever it is that has to manage those signatures, whether it be the IT department or someone else. Another way that email signatures could potentially be hurting your organization is through rogue signatures. Now, there are a million different types of rogue signatures, and later on, just for fun, I'm going to be showing you quite a few examples of some rogue signatures. But one way that rogue signatures can be problematic is with employees who exaggerate job titles. You know, as I talk about this, I can't help but think about a friend that I used to know, and I'm not going to share her name because I don't want to disrespect anyone, but at the time that I was hired at this particular organization, her official job title was secretary. Now, to the best of my knowledge, she never had a promotion or anything like that, but over the years that I was there, her job title changed to administrative assistant, and then I believe it was executive assistant, and by the time I left the organization, she had changed her job title to support coordinator. Now, these weren't official changes. It was just changes that she came up with. And in this case, that probably wasn't a problem, but you can just imagine the chaos that would ensue if everybody in your organization just kind of made up their own job titles. So you really don't want that type of rogue signature present in your organization. And like I said, that's just one type of rogue signature. We're going to be talking about quite a few others as we go along. So another way that clinging to the old way of doing things can potentially be problematic for an organization is in terms of time and cost. Because think about it from an IT department perspective. If IT is having to manage message signatures, well then they're consuming time, and that's time that could be better spent on more important items. And there's also a cost associated with all of the employee hours that are dedicated to signature management. So you have to factor that in. Never mind the fact that if you're taking that manual approach to signature management, you're missing out on the opportunity to add promotional banners, promotional banners and other things to message signatures. For example, if your organization is having an event, then maybe you want to append a banner to everyone's message signature promoting that event and then remove it once that event is over. That's something that's very commonly done. But if your organization is handling signatures manually or through a script or something like that, that can be very difficult and costly and time-consuming to achieve. So those are just a few of the potential downsides. Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, it's worth noting that an email, most of the time, when you send that to a customer or a colleague, it's the first time you're introducing yourself to that person. So if your signature's inconsistent or doesn't look good or it's got a crazy job title, it's not a good first impression. So I think it's something that needs to be, you bear in mind that if you're introducing yourself to someone, it's good to have something that looks good. It's got links on it that you can click on back to your website and you can record those clicks. Yeah, that's it really. Back to you, Brian.
Okay. So let's talk about some challenges from the IT perspective. And there are a few that immediately come to mind. First is in some situations, there's absolutely no automation in place, and the IT department gets tasked with manually updating everyone's email signatures, whether that involves copy and paste or simply typing it in or whatever. And that can be extremely time-consuming, and I think I speak for everyone when I say it's really not much fun. It's kind of a dull job, and you'd probably rather wish you were doing something else. But it's also prone to human error and typos and things like that. So manually updating signatures just really isn't a good way to go any way that you look at it. Now, it is possible to automate email signature management, and you can do that using a PowerShell script. You can do it using Mailflow rules if you're using Exchange Server. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is that automation solutions such as Mailflow rules and PowerShell scripts tend to be based on attributes that are stored in the Active Directory or in Enter ID, which used to be known as Azure Active Directory. So if your Active Directory is missing attributes or if it's outdated, well, that can quickly become problematic. Because think about this. Best case is that there's a few attributes that are wrong, and that means that some of the email signatures are wrong. But imagine what would happen if you had some attributes that were completely missing. What you would end up with is if you were trying to create standardized job titles standardized email signatures, is you would end up with some gaps in the message signatures simply because of those missing Active Directory attributes. So that's not going to look very good on the screen. Again, if you're trying to do this using native tools, Microsoft 365 Mailflow rules, which is built into Exchange, is certainly a viable option. But what I will say is that it isn't necessarily easy to get the results that you want, particularly if you're trying to do something custom. And Mailflow rules were really never designed for message signatures. And I'll show you some examples of that a little bit later on. Paul, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, as an example, for number one specifically, when I started working at a company, I won't say the name, when I walked into the door as the IT manager there, they had an engineer whose job it was to update 250 signatures every time there was a new award or a logo change or something like that, and he had to go into each mailbox and do it himself. So I mean, as soon as I saw that, it was kind of, we need to sort this out, and we went looking for a signature management solution. That's kind of the thing that IT people really shouldn't be doing. They should be using their tech skills, not changing logos and bits on signatures. That's really what I have on that. Back to you, Brian.
So let's take a look at Mailflow rules. So what you see right here is a screen capture from the Exchange Admin Center within the Microsoft 365 console. So what I've done to get to the screen is I've gone into the Exchange Admin Center, I've expanded the Mailflow container, and then clicked on Rules. And if you have any Mailflow rules that already exist, this is where they'll show up. But if you want to create a new Mailflow rule, you would simply click on the Add a Rule button, which you can see on this slide. So from there, that's going to take you to this screen right here. So when you click Add a Rule, you're prompted to choose what kind of rule you want to create. And we've got several different options here. For example, apply Office 365 message encryption and rights protection to messages, apply custom branding to OEM messages, apply disclaimers, filter messages by size, modify messages, and so on. Now, you'll notice that there isn't an option here for creating an email signature. That option doesn't exist. So what organizations that want to use Mailflow rules to create a signature will typically do is they'll use the option to apply disclaimers. Now, disclaimers were never intended to be used as message signatures. A disclaimer was intended to be just that, a disclaimer. We've all seen examples of this. This message is confidential. If it was received by someone other than the intended recipient, please delete it, something like that. But disclaimers is the mechanism that's often used to create message signatures. So when you select the disclaimers option, you're taken to the screen right here. And the first thing that you have to do is to provide a name for the rule that you're creating. You can see that in this case I called it signature. And then you have apply this rule if. So you have to come up with some sort of condition that will be the basis for triggering the rule to be applied. In this case, I've got apply the rule if the sender, and then you would choose is internal, because you really don't want to apply this to external senders. Now, one thing that I will point out is that the sender option isn't the only option that's available to you. There are quite a few different options. You can base this on individual users or on groups, so there is some flexibility there. But there are some gotchas that I'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. So once you've chosen the criteria for triggering the rule, the next thing that you have to do is you have to specify what it is that should happen once that trigger is reached. So in this case, do the following is set to apply a disclaimer to the message, and then I have append disclaimer. So this is where you would click on the edit icon and you would type in the message that you want to append. And you can see in the blue text just below the apply a disclaimer to this message box, it says this is an example of a message signature. So that's something that I typed in. So from there, you can set an exception if you need one. That's not generally something that you would do if you were creating message signatures. And then you go to the rule settings screen. So you have to tell Exchange how you want this rule to be enforced. So you can enforce the rule, meaning that the rule is activated and it's applied at that point. You can test it with policy tips or test it without policy tips. You have to set a severity, which generally would be low if we're talking about message signatures, and then set an activation date for the rule. You can also optionally set a deactivation date, but that's not something that you necessarily have to worry about. So once you've got all of this set, then you come to the review and finish screen. At that point, you would take a moment and just review everything that you've entered to make sure that it's correct, and then the rule is created. Now, interestingly, you can do more than just create a plain text signature like what I had done on some of the previous slides. You can include things like HTML tags, cascading style sheets, and you can even add images if that image is hosted online somewhere, and you can use the IMG tag. Additionally, there are various attributes that you can embed in the message signatures, and you can see some of those attributes listed on the right side of the screen, things like city, company, department, display name, fax, first name, home phone, things like that. So you can include these various attributes in the message signatures. Keep in mind, however, that these attributes are being pulled from the Active Directory. So if the Active Directory is missing attributes, or if you've got outdated information in the Active Directory, well, then that's going to impact the signatures that you create. So there are some challenges that are associated with using Mailflow rules for signatures, because in the short demo that I gave you, it appears that creating a Mailflow rule to act as a signature is a fairly straightforward process, and it is. But it's not ideal. There are several potential issues. You have to keep in mind that mail flow rules were designed for disclaimers, as I pointed out earlier. They were never intended to be used for signatures. That's just a way that some organizations have begun using that feature. So what are some problems? Well, one problem is that there's nothing stopping a user from creating their own signature. Because remember, Exchange isn't aware that there's a signature. It thinks that there's a disclaimer, not a signature. Outlook has a signature feature of its own, so a user can go into Outlook and create their own signature. And so what would happen at that point is that a user goes to send an email message, and the recipient will see the user's signature, and they'll also see the disclaimer that was appended by the mailflow rule. So essentially there's two different signatures at that point on the same message, which can be messy and confusing and that sort of thing. And it can really be confusing if the user has used an exaggerated job title on their own signature and has a different job title on the signature that was applied by the organization through the mailflow rule. So users creating their own signatures through Outlook is certainly one problem. Another problem is that the rules can be difficult to manage if different departments require unique signatures. Now, if I can go back a couple of slides here, I showed you that this particular rule was being applied if the sender is internal. And I mentioned that that's not the only way that you can do things. Another option is to create a rule and base it on groups. So you can apply the rule if the user is a member of a particular group. And that's one way that you can make it so that people in different departments have different signatures. Now, the problem with that is that you can run into situations in which you have to start splitting groups. Maybe some people in the department need one signature and some other people within the department need a different signature. Things can get messy really quickly. Perhaps a bigger problem is that it can be very difficult to verify that signatures are being applied correctly. So imagine this for a moment. You've set up mailflow rules for the very first time. You've created a signature to be used by the entire organization. And the first thing that you would probably do in a situation like that is send yourself a test email just to see if the signature is being applied correctly. And let's say that it is. That's great. But that only confirms that the signature is working for your own mailbox. It doesn't tell you anything about anybody else's mailbox. So at that point, you might fire up an email or make a phone call to a few people throughout the organization and ask them to send you a test email so that you can see how signatures are being applied. And that will at least kind of give you a feel of how things are working, but it doesn't give you comprehensive confirmation that the signatures are being applied correctly throughout the entire organization. There really isn't an easy way to verify that. So that's one potential problem, is that you can't verify that signatures are being applied as intended on a company-wide basis. And then the other problem that's highlighted on the slide is that if there's any missing information in the Active Directory, or if that information is outdated, then the result can be incomplete signatures or gaps within a signature. So, Paul, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this?
What struck me when I was an IT manager doing these tasks, it was the fact that the IT department, as good as IT we are and techie as we are, we're not designers, right? So I found it very helpful to pass the design of email signatures on to a marketing team, and they were happy to take it because it's something they can advertise on, right? So you can, if you're using a different solution than the Mailflow rules, obviously you're not going to get a marketing person logging into Mailflow rules to change signatures. It's just not going to work because it's a lot of scripting and changing settings. If you have a third-party solution, you can give access to the marketing team, and they can design the signatures and change the signatures as they want to if the logos change. Found that very helpful switching. Back to you, Brian.
So how do you know if the status quo or your current approach is no longer meeting your organization's needs? Well, you got to remember, the status quo looks different in every organization. So you could have a situation where the status quo involves letting each user manage their own mail signatures. In other words, doing nothing at all from the corporate level or the IT level, or managing signatures through Mailflow rules. The thing is that organizations often consider the status quo to be good enough, at least until an incident occurs. At that point, they find themselves having to completely rethink mail flow signatures and decide, okay, what are we going to do now? And in my mind, it's a whole lot better to go ahead and be proactive and take action on message signatures right now before any sort of incident occurs, rather than waiting for some sort of incident to happen. Paul, did you have something?
Yeah, there's if you head over to the Exclaimer website, we'll put the link in the chat probably at the end. There is a calculator that tells you how much time you're wasting, basically, how much time you can then calculate on managing email signatures, the amount of signatures, amount of users. So that's a helpful tip.
So what I really want to highlight with all of this is that message signature management, when it's done manually, it can be problematic, and that holds true whether you're using mailflow rules or whether you're truly taking a manual approach to signature management. The IT department can be completely bogged down if they're getting frequent requests for email signature updates. Never mind the approval process that goes along with that. Because if you're working in IT and you're tasked with updating message signatures, and you get a phone call from some random user saying, hey, change my job title to pick your job title of choice. Well, how do you know if they've truly received a promotion or if they're simply trying to elevate their own status within the company? There has to be somebody who would approve that. And so that's not only tying up the IT department at that point, that's also tying up whoever it is that has to authorize the change. There can also be some technical challenges associated with the update process. For example, if signatures are managed on a group-by-group basis, like what I talked about earlier, but now you have some people within a particular group who need a different signature from everybody else in the group, well, how are you going to handle that? At that point, your best option is probably to create two brand new groups just for message signatures. So things can really start getting messy at the Active Directory level at that point if you've got overlapping groups. Another big problem is rogue signatures. And I touched on this one a little bit earlier when I talked about my friend who had the exaggerated job titles, but there are many other types of rogue signatures. And maybe a simple definition of a rogue signature is just a signature that doesn't align with the corporate standard. And there are any number of different ways that a signature could be considered to be rogue, and there are some really amusing examples out there. So let's take a look at a few examples. Oh, before I do, Paul, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this?
No, not on this one, no.
Okay. So let's take a look at a few examples. On the left, we have a signature of best regards, Jane Doe, Chief Happiness Officer, with a little smiley face emoji, XYZ Corporation, Live, Laugh, Love. Now, there are several different problems with this one. First of all, I'm guessing that Chief Happiness Officer probably isn't an official job title, and the smiley face emoji doesn't look all that professional. Then down at the very bottom, we have Live, Laugh, Love. And not even quite sure what that means, but I'm guessing that that's not the official corporate slogan. Then just below that, we have Sent from my iPhone, so please excuse the typos and the lack of interest. Now, I have to admit, we've probably all felt that way at some point or another, but I'm guessing this isn't the type of image that your organization wants to project. If this is going out to a customer and the email signature says, please excuse the lack of interest, well, that's definitely not the message you want to be sending to your customers. Then we have the middle one. Cheers, John Smith, Guru of Marketing Magic. Vote for XYZ. Contact me on my personal blog at www.page.com. So again, there's several problems with this one, starting with the fact that Guru of Marketing Magic isn't a real job title. Then vote for XYZ. Unless your organization has officially endorsed a particular candidate, that's probably not something that should be in an employee's message signature. A lot of organizations try to keep things neutral because the minute that you start promoting one candidate or the other, you alienate 50% of your customers. So probably not a great thing to have in your message signature. And then promoting a personal blog, again, that's not something that aligns with the organization's goals. Then on the far right, we have Warmest Wishes, Emily Brown, Senior Sales Ninja, reach me anytime. So again, the Senior Sales Ninja probably isn't an official job title, and the ninja emoji doesn't really reflect a very professional image. So let's look at some more examples of, okay, my browser locked up here. Let me try refreshing this. Okay, so let's look at a few more examples of some rogue signatures. Here we have one that is overly personal. We have cheers, Mike, dad to 3 awesome kids and 2 dogs, and then we have a couple of dog emojis, XYZ Corp, and then personalblog.com. So again, this one is overly personal because the recipient probably doesn't need to know that this person has a couple of kids and a couple of dogs. And again, this person is promoting a personal blog, which doesn't really fall in line with the organization's goals. Next, we have imagery or emojis. So we have Karen Smith, Sales Superstar, XYZ Corp, and a phone number. So Sales Superstar, depending on the organization, that one may end up being okay. I don't know. It's probably not an official job title, but we have all of these emojis that are plastered on here. There's a flower and a sunshine emoji after the person's name and what looks like a briefcase emoji after their job title. You know, in some organizations, this might be okay, but it does tend to be a little bit distracting, and it doesn't necessarily project the most professional image. You know, and again, the lesson here is that every organization's standards are going to be different. So you need something that's going to be flexible enough to adapt to whatever the organization's standards might be. So the next example that we have is a signature that is overly casual. And I'll be the first to tell you, I am totally guilty of this. But in this case, we have Catch You Later, Bob the Builder Johnson, Construction Guru, XYZ. So again, this one's just a little too casual. The phrase catch you later, a nickname inserted in the middle of the person's name, and an unofficial job title. Then we have excessive contact methods. So we have regards, Alice Brown, Marketing Queen, XYZ Corp. So again, Marketing Queen probably isn't a real job title, but the big problem on this one is the excessive contact methods, because we have an office number, a home number, a cell number, a pager number, Skype, and Instagram. So office and cell I get, but probably not a great idea to include your home number unless there's a legitimate business need for that. And regarding the pager, who even uses those anymore? And then we have Skype and Instagram. I'll reserve judgment on those. Then we have personal business promotion. Best Jane Doe financial analyst at XYZ Corporation. So far, so good. But then we have check out my side hustle at www.page.com. So the organization is probably not anxious to see employees promoting their side hustles through email signatures. And this would especially be true if the side hustle was something that directly competed with the organization that the user works for. Then we have personal opinions or preferences. And Paul, I think you should probably take this one.
Yeah, in the UK, I'm not sure how many attendees are from the UK. The football team you support can get quite tribal. So if you put your football team in there, for instance, this one's mine. There are other teams and other people in other companies who may not appreciate that. So you're probably alienating those people. Same as if you're putting your candidate you're voting for, kind of thing.
Yeah, the football is definitely a whole different animal over there. I was actually on the phone with somebody in the UK once, and just out of the blue, they called me a really rude name when it wasn't called for, and I asked what was going on, and they're like, okay, I'm sorry, you caught us. We were secretly watching the Manchester United. So, yeah, good times.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that this year,
yeah.
Unfortunately.
So next we have lame humor. Take it easy, Gary Thompson, Chief Slack Officer, and a really goofy smiley face emoji, XYZ Corporation. So again, take it easy probably isn't the best or the most professional way to sign off on an email. And then Chief Slack Officer, not a real job title, and then the emoji that just raises things to a whole nother level. Too much personal information. So we have best regards, Emily Watson, Project Manager, XYZ Corporation. So far, so good. And then at the very bottom, we have all of this personal information, amateur baker, marathon runner, book lover, and Virgo. So this is information that's probably not needed. More than that, it's distracting. It may not go along with the image that the organization is trying to project. But something else that I would point out is that if this were to contain a lot of links or things like that, it could potentially become a security risk, either to the organization or to the user, since they're exposing personal information. And it's also worth noting that if an email signature does contain an excessive number of links, then there's an increased risk that that message is going to be flagged by the recipient's spam filter. It's not necessarily a guarantee that the message is going to be flagged as spam, but it is something that a lot of spam filters will at least look at. So that's worth considering. So at this point, we have the top 3 frequently asked questions. And Paul, why don't you take a stab at this one?
Mm-hmm. So the first one, can I add the image to my Office 365 email signature? Yes, you can. So there's the ways you've shown already today. So you can use the manual method, just making your own signature. Use the mail flow rules, which again we've been through. And that's not as easy to do if you're not technical. Or you can have a third-party solution, which could be a solution for a lot of companies that want to, one, take away the time taken by IT to do these, and 2, you could give it to someone more creative or someone who wants to project a different image for the company on email. Number 2, by using an email signature, do I increase the likelihood of being flagged as spam? Depends what you put in that signature. Again, if you are making your own email signatures and you're putting massive images in there, lots of links, too many words, they can be flagged as spam. We had quite a lot of those issues at previous employment, where people were just putting all sorts of images in their signatures and they were being quarantined on the other end. And number 3, what if I want a different email signatures for different departments? That can be done in Mailflow, as you pointed out, Brian. Also, you can do that in a third party as well. So particularly the Exclaimer solution, you can link them to Azure or Entra groups for specific departments and link those signatures to those departments.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that can be done in Mailflow, but as somebody who's done it, if you don't have a really cut and dry group structure that mimics what you're trying to do, it can get messy really quickly. Mailflow rules aren't the ideal mechanism for doing it. So this raises the question of when should you consider a new approach to what you're doing? Well, there are several situations that might come about that would drive you to adopt a new approach to Mailflow signature management. The first one is email or inheriting an email signature tool and having to decide whether it's worth keeping. So maybe you're put into a new position and your predecessor used a particular software package for managing message signatures, and you don't know anything about this, and you have to evaluate it and find out if it's worth keeping or if there's something else that might be a little bit better. That's certainly one situation where you might want to consider a new approach. Another is being tasked with an email migration project, because if you're moving your messages from one mail platform to another, you're doing more than just migrating messages at that point. You're making decisions along the way about what can be improved, what settings do I need to enable on this new platform, what settings should be disabled, and that may be a really good opportunity to also take a look at how your organization is handling mail signatures and make a change if a change is warranted. Another opportunity is when you're doing an Active Directory restructuring. And the reason why I say that is because so often message signatures are based on Active Directory attributes. And so if you're in the process of restructuring your Active Directory, normally there's an Active Directory audit that goes along with that. And that's a great opportunity to find those missing job titles or inaccurate information embedded within Active Directory attributes. And that also might present an opportunity to consider, hey, what we're doing right now to handle message signatures really working for us, or is there something better out there? So that we don't end up in a situation down the road where, once again, we have outdated and missing Active Directory attributes that are messing up our message signatures. Another one is when you're faced with a compliance audit, because I showed you quite a few examples on some of the earlier slides of rogue message signatures. And there are some of those that could be problematic from a compliance audit standpoint. Now, which ones are problematic? Well, it's really going to depend on what type of compliance audit you're receiving. But anything that could potentially present a security risk or that might be considered misleading or something like that might raise problems with the auditor. So if you know you've got a compliance audit coming up, that may be a really good indication that it's time to take a look at how you're handling message signatures and see if a change is going to be needed. Also, when rogue signatures get out of hand, it's not that uncommon for users to have a little bit of fun with their message signatures, but when it gets to the point where you have everybody in the organization doing it and the signatures are completely inconsistent from one another and it's just no longer projecting the type of image that the organization is trying to project, that's a very good indication that it's time to take action and do something about message signatures. And then the big one at the very end is when you're spending way too much time managing signatures. Paul, did you have anything to add?
You covered that one.
So this raises the question of what types of things should you look for in a third-party signature management tool. I've listed a few things on this slide, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. This was just some of the things that immediately came to mind as I was putting this presentation together. So the very first thing that I would recommend looking for is a GUI interface with a rich editor. And that might seem like an odd thing to lead with, but recently I've been spending quite a bit of time on an unrelated project. It actually has to do with robotics of all things. But the nature of this project has forced me to spend a lot of time working at the command line. And there have been several incidents where I've had to do things at the command line that would have been so much quicker and easier if I just had a GUI to be able to do it. So you can imagine the difference that a GUI would make with managing email signatures as opposed to having to do everything from the command line in a scripting environment. So I would say that a GUI interface with a very rich text editor is a must-have when it comes to signature management. From there, a mechanism for applying signatures based on rules. And you've seen a few examples of this. A rule might determine which groups receive which signatures. There are several different ways that rules could potentially be used. Also, the ability to use temporary signatures, and this plays back into the rules engine that I talked about just a moment ago. So let's say for a moment that your organization is hosting an event. Well, you might have a rule that says starting on such and such date, apply this banner promoting that event to everyone in the organization's message signature, and then remove that banner when the event is over. And you could create a rule to do that automatically as opposed to having to write a custom script that's going to handle that for you, or in the worst case, having to go in and manually add that banner to everybody's signature and then manually remove it once the event is over. The next thing on the list, centralized management, and that is a big one. You need the ability to manage everyone's message signatures from one place through a single pane of glass interface rather than having to maintain a vast collection of scripts and mail flow rules or what have you. The next thing is the ability to delegate signature management based on role-based access control, or RBAC as it's often called. The idea behind this goes back to what Paul was saying earlier. In IT, a lot of us aren't artistically inclined. We're techies, not necessarily designers. So we might not always be able to do the best job with creating a banner to go along with a mail flow, creating a banner to go along with a message signature, or creating a logo or something like that. So if you got an RBAC interface, you can give everybody exactly the rights that they need. And you can do a few things with that. You could allow each department to create their own signature so that you don't have to be involved. Or another thing that you could do is you could allow the graphic arts department or the marketing department to create those graphical elements, and then you and IT are able to leverage those elements because they have the rights to create them. So RBAC is important. It can save you a lot of work, and it can help to distribute the task of signature management as it makes sense to do so within your organization. Another thing that is very helpful to have is an analytics dashboard that can track clicks. Now, on the surface, this seems like a really odd thing to talk about in the context of signature management, but there is a method to the madness. Let's go back to the example that I gave just a moment ago about your organization has an event and they want to promote that event through banners within message signatures. Well, let's say that you send a message out to a client and it's got this banner on it promoting your event, and the client wants to attend your event. You really don't want that client to have to go out on the web and do a Google search for the event. It would be way easier for them to simply be able to click on the banner within the message signature and be automatically taken to the page for the event. It just saves a lot of effort that way. So if you have made that banner clickable, it would be really great to be able to track those clicks. So that's where an analytics engine comes into play, is because a good analytics engine can help you to track the click-through rate on those special promotions that you're including within your message signatures. And then finally, the ability to incorporate functional elements. And that can be banners, it can be links, it can even be QR codes. Just something to go inside of the message signatures that actually does something other than convey information. So Paul, did you have anything to add to that?
Just that there is a buyer's guide for Exclaimer on the webinar panel. So if you want to have a look at that, that's there for you.
Okay, and so here are the results from the poll that was given earlier. Paul, did you want to present the poll results?
Yeah, I was waiting for this one. So this is where I'm interested in. So yeah, it looks like most people are using manual. So people are letting their users run free. Whether that works for you guys or not, I'm not sure. IT, 22.5%, doing mail flow rules, sounds about right. And then only 10% use a third-party solution. Interesting.
Okay,
Wonderful.
so with that...
I'm sorry. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian and Paul, for that presentation. There's lots of useful information there. We do have some questions in from the audience, and I want to remind the audience at this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in right now, and we'll get to them and have them answered for you by the experts. And speaking of our experts, we'd love to welcome Tom Yates, who is the Principal Solutions Engineer at Exclaimer, to help answer some of these questions. Our first question is from someone looking for advice on what are the industry standards for how signatures are attached to emails in Office 365 when working with a third-party company. They're saying they could be overzealous about their data and security, but they just want to make sure they have a better understanding of this.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. I'd recommend actually performing thorough due diligence really with any vendor. While most email signature providers integrate in a very similar way with Office 365, many lack the high-level certifications that we hold, such as our ISO certifications, SOC Type 2 compliance, HIPAA compliance, and Microsoft certification as well. Additionally, they often don't provide security information as transparently as what we do. Our portal and security documentation really are excellent resources to address that data and security concerns that you have. And we also offer a vendor risk assessment checklist to assist in evaluating suppliers. And you can find all of these links in our Resource Center panel on this webinar platform.
All righty, our next question is, whenever I build an email SIG, using transport rules in 365, the SIG always stacks at the bottom of an email chain. Why does that happen? And what can I do about it?
Yeah, I understand. That's frustrating, right? The lack of industry standards affects us all, and we only really notice that when it impacts our own signatures. I'd say it's important to remember that the disclaimer function in Office 365 is designed for plain text messages. It's not for email signatures. It's also not meant to handle HTML content. Now, while you can hard code HTML, it's often not going to display correctly because the disclaimer function isn't intended for sign-off signatures. Now, instead of appearing directly under your text you just typed, it will then be appended to the very end of the entire message body. Now, unlike with a solution of Exclaimer, it detects the reply separator that marks the end of your message and the beginning of the email trail, thus placing the signature above where it should are naturally expected to be seen. Whereas in contrast, the transport mail flow rules is designed to add an email disclaimer, not specifically an email signature.
Awesome, thank you. We also have, how do I convince my boss to get a tool to manage email signatures? Will it be worth the investment?
I'll take
That's
that one.
a great question. Yeah, Paul, if you want to take that one.
I've been here a few times. The best way I approached it was the time I'd calculate the tickets that came in to do with email signatures, whether that was wrong information, emails being marked as spam, anything to do with, can you change my email signature for me or it's not working? And I would put a monetary value to that, and make a business case and say, look, this is the time that's being wasted. This is something that we could be doing other things to improve IT for the business instead of messing around with email signatures. I think that's probably the best way to go.
Outstanding, thank you. What are some steps involved in setting up and configuring email signature management in a Microsoft environment?
I can jump in on that one.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've obviously discussed a little bit around that today in terms of the various mail flow rule options that you have. I would say with a third-party solution like Exclaimer, it's so much easier, which we've kind of already discovered as well today. So you have a platform where you can centrally manage the signatures from, and those then be immediately deployed and pushed out to your various different users, giving you much more kind of control, standardization that you could ever look to achieve by just utilizing Mailflow rules as it stands.
Awesome. I believe that's all the questions we got in today. It looks like that's all we have today. Thank you so much, Brian, Paul, and Tom, for being here with us today. Thank you to the audience for attending today's webcast, and a special thank you to Exclaimer for sponsoring today's event presented by Redmond Mac. Have a wonderful rest of your day.